5 running backs I'm going to start heading into Week 14, which is the first round of the playoffs here for most fantasy leagues. The first guy is Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. Elliott, he had a pretty decent game versus Baltimore, considering the circumstances and stuff. Elliott, he had a good game, like I said, in PPR leagues, 13.5 points, 18 rushes, 77 yards, 4 catches, and 18 yards on the game. This week they versus Cincinnati. Players, they've been running well on Cincinnati. We saw it with Gaskin. We saw it with Wayne Gallman a few weeks ago. And Zeke this week, I have him in the top 15 in my running back rankings. So if you didn't see that video, you'll get the top 30 rankings of the week. But anyway, Elliott, he's got a decent matchup. The workload's obviously going to be there. He looked healthy and he looked quicker than he did last week. So maybe that little hamstring pull was nothing serious. And Elliott, I think this week versus Cincinnati, anywhere from 12 to 17 points I think he could get. And that's not bad. I know you drafted him early in drafts in the first round, but this is a guy you still got to play him pretty much each and every week unless he's got a real tough matchup, because that offensive line is banged up, but he's still going to be the main guy in that offense, him and Cooper. So Zeke Elliott will be the first starter. Number 2, David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears. Montgomery, since coming off the concussion and the bye week a few weeks ago, he's come back and he's looked better than ever. And I think with Mitchell Trubisky in the starting lineup and the good matchups he's had has made it happen. In Week 12 versus Green Bay, he had a big ball game with 11 carries, 103 yards, 5 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown. And then last week versus Detroit in Week 13, 17 carries, 72 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 4 catches for 39 yards. So this week again versus Houston, who gives up the second most fantasy points to running backs, David Montgomery, I think he's going to have a good game. He's going to get things going. Trubisky, the Bears, they don't want him throwing the ball 40, 45 times like he did versus Green Bay. And Montgomery, the workload is there. I know Cordell Patterson had 10 touches last week, but he's still the number 1 back over there, is Montgomery. And as long as he's getting goal line touches and some catches out of the backfield, he'll be fine. I don't think he'll score in the upper 20s, but this week I could see him score 15 to 20, and he's ranked this week 13 for me in my running back rankings. So he's the second guy I'm going to start. The third guy is Melvin Gordon of the Denver Broncos. It was good to see Gordon last week have a good ball game for once versus the Kansas City Chiefs, and Gordon, I think he took full possession of that backfield now. After Phillip Lindsay, he didn't do much or get much carries as well. And Gordon, he's got a good matchup versus Carolina this week that gives up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. Last week versus Kansas City, Gordon, big ball game, like I said, 15 carries, 131 yards, and 1 catch for 11 yards. So he had a good game with 13-20 fantasy points. It would have been nice to see him get a touchdown in there, but this Bronco team, they're out of it, obviously, but they're also a team, they don't want Drew Lock throwing the ball all game long 35, 40 times, and the Broncos, they've just been trailing a lot the whole season. But I think Melvin Gordon, I like the matchup here, and he's a guy that's good as a number 2 to 3 running back this week in your starting lineup. And the fourth guy is DAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions. Swift, if he plays this week, I love the matchup for him versus the Green Bay Packers, who give up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. And Swift, he was limited at practice yesterday, and he had a concussion, and then he non-COVID illness last week. So this guy, he just hasn't seen the field now since Week 10, where he had his first start in his career, where he had a huge fantasy game, 81 rushing yards, 5 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. And here versus Green Bay, if he does play, Matt Stafford and the Lions, they're going to rely on Swift. Their team outside looking in the playoff hunt, but if they could get a couple games put together, they got a shot of possibly making it. And this is a week where they want to beat Green Bay. This is a division matchup. Swift, he's going to get a huge workload, I believe, if he does come back this week. And he's a guy I have in number 10 starting in my rankings in the running backs this week. So if Swift plays, I expect a big game out of him. And the 5th and final guy is Todd Gurley of the Atlanta Falcons. Gurley, the last 2 weeks, he just hasn't had anything going. And that knee injury is concerning, and it's something I brought up weeks ago, that this might happen to Todd Gurley, and now it has. Last week, He just couldn't get anything going once again. 3 fantasy points for Gurley. 8 rushes, 16 yards, and a catch for 4 yards. This week, though, I like the matchup a lot versus the Chargers. But if you have better options than Gurley, obviously you go there. But versus the Chargers, I think he could get you 50, 60 total yards and a touchdown. And that's not bad for number 2 running back production, considering the injuries and the guys struggling this season. So that's 5 running backs I'm going to start here heading into week 14.